Madam Speaker.
I call Fletcher Tabuteau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise on behalf of the Labour New Zealand First Government. What I'd like to do, with your forbearance, Madam Speaker, is just address some of the comments put forward from the previous speaker, who I, dare I say it, actually enjoy that he and acknowledge that he can now be part of the debate. As much as I disagreed of perhaps about 95% of what he said, at least it was an enjoyable contribution which at least added something of vigour to the House this afternoon. and others may call it noise, and actually I'll be hard-pressed to argue. Madam Speaker, the member in the first contribution, Mr Joyce, spoke about claiming success by that party for this bill. He claimed that they had done the work. I stand here, Mr Speaker, to say that this has been a problem for New Zealand for, I think my learned colleague Mr Woods used 9 years as a specific number. But let's agree in the House that it's been nearly a decade that we have been dealing with this problem that party over there, now in opposition, knew was a problem. Mr Macleay was told that this was a problem when he was the Minister of Revenue, and, Madam Speaker, he sat on his hands. Mr Woodhouse was told that this was a problem, and he sat on his hands. And yet, Madam Speaker, as this took 9 years for these members to sit on their hands. As we progressed to an election period, the previous Minister of Revenue decided that action was required. And actually, it is an opportunity to acknowledge the work of the officials and the previous Minister for the work that was undertaken in this space. But, Madam Speaker, let's be perfectly clear that for nearly 8 years, those members stood up and said nothing could be done, we have to wait for an international solution, primarily from the OECD, they said. We have to wait for an international solution from the OECD. And this is where I have a problem with where we are today, Madam Speaker, because this is a government that is standing up in the House actually presenting legislation. Let's bear in mind that this is the first reading, which you said for Madam Speaker, which Mr Smith said for 8 years didn't need addressing, but last year there's a problem. That's right. That's the record that you come into this debate with, Mr Smith. 8 years, not a problem. A year ago, we've got a problem, we better do something about it. That is that party's record. So, Madam Speaker, I am proud to be standing here today on behalf of New Zealand First and this coalition government to say that that government's apathy or non-action was an indictment on that party. New Zealanders had been standing up, standing strong.
Order. Yes, would you come to the bill? Would you debate the bill, please? You've had almost 3.5 minutes now on general debate. I would like the Speaker to come and discuss the bill. This is a first reading of a bill. Broad preamble. It's not a broad preamble.
I apologise, Madam Speaker, if I have not worked within the purview of the first reading. It comes from frustration. My apologies. So,
generally politics, I find.
The bill, Madam Chair, and I will try and use words carefully so as not to repeat what has been said before. But what we're talking about, Madam Speaker, is the neutralising of base erosion and profit shifting. Now, what multinationals in particular have been able to do for, I've just argued, nearly a decade, is that they have been able to use different mechanisms which this bill addresses in 4 parts, by which they can avoid, we argue, their commitment to their tax obligations here in New Zealand. And New Zealanders have consistently called, as has this government called, for those multinationals to pay their fair share. So what we are talking about Madam Speaker, is what essentially has become an acronym of the 21st century, the BEPS, the base erosion and profit shifting issue that the world, admittedly, is having to deal with. It relates to the ability of these multinationals in particular to avoid their tax commitments. And there are examples, which I would highlight to the opposition on the other side, of New Zealand businesses who are working under New Zealand legislation, who are compelled to work within the confines that this House gives them in terms of their obligations of tax, which their competitors, who are international, have been able to avoid by means outlined in this legislation which the House is seeking to address now. So it has not only been a question of those multinationals paying their fair share, but New Zealand businesses being able to compete on an even playing field. And New Zealand business have missed out on large contracts because multinationals have been able to cost out their long-term commitments in terms of cost and pricing, such that they know that they haven't been required to pay their tax. Now, that's an immediate advantage which New Zealand businesses have been crying out for a long period of time. It is important to address these BEPS activities without reducing the attractiveness of New Zealand. And the members spoke of that with reasonable fairness, that it is a matter of making sure we do move down a path that is both a mechanism by which these multinationals cannot avoid their obligations. But yes, we do need international business. There are great businesses around the world which New Zealand would encourage to be here. But as I said just in that previous statement, let's ensure that New Zealand and multinational businesses are competing on an even playing field. And so the four main measures proposed, Madam Speaker, to prevent multinationals from taking advantage of this uneven playing field have been their use of parent companies being able to charge artificially high interest rates. And so we have seen examples of that. There's an example, which I won't name specifically, here in Wellington, where that has been exactly the case, where the parent company has charged the local branch, as it were, for want of a better word, artificially high interest, so that what we would otherwise have called profits have been committed offshore in terms of interest commitments to a parent company. Now, what this legislation seeks to do, Madam Speaker, is to acknowledge and ensure that these companies recognise that a commitment to a parent company is not a true cost in terms of returns to shareholders. So what the bill is arguing is that those returns will remain neutral. You can't artificially manage the interest rates up so that those profits can be shifted offshore. The next, Madam Speaker, is the hybrid mismatch arrangements that exploit differences between countries, which is to say different tax rates in different regions. And I think with the time I have left, I will take it that is as read. And the artificial arrangements to avoid having a taxable presence or permanent establishment in New Zealand. So, again, I think Mr Wood spoke about the good old days of having a big factory here and setting up shop, as it were. Now, that's not necessarily the case in services industries nowadays, and so it becomes very difficult to manage and track these kind of interactions, spendings, revenues, costs, so that those companies can be held to account in terms of what is fair in terms of their commitment to the New Zealand taxpayer. And the last one, Madam Speaker, is the related parties transactions or transfer pricing, which shifts profits into offshore group members in a manner that does not reflect the actual economic activities undertaken in New Zealand and offshore. So, with 20 seconds to go, may I please say to the House it is a pleasure to stand in support of this legislation. I do look forward to the work in the Select Committee It is populated by a good group of people, and I look forward to that work. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, I call Barbara Curran.